Hello everyone, welcome to your English class. I'm Jasmine and this is the 41st module. In this module, we are going to discuss the final segment of the chapter The Enemy, written by Pearl S. Buck, taken from the book Vistus. I know you all are eagerly waiting to know how the story ends. But before that, let's have a quick recap of what we have done so far. In the previous module, we saw the secret killers of the general never turned up as assured by the general. And finally, Sadao asking the American man to escape to the nearby island and stay there until he finds a Korean boat nearby. The American soldier agrees with that, realizing the fact that if he stay with Sadao further, it will cause trouble to both of them. So now let's continue reading the story further. Sadao left and did not meet the young man until evening. During the day he made arrangements for him. As it became dark, Sadao pulled out a big boat to the shore. He placed food and bottled water in it that he had bought secretly during the day. Then he kept 2 quills in it, which he secretly purchased from the pawnshop during the day. As there was a high tide in the sea, he tied the boat to a pole. It was a dark, moonless night, and Sadao worked without a torch, because he did not want to be spotted by anyone. When Sadao came home, he pretended as though he had just returned from work, so that Hannah did not guess anything. Hannah served him the evening meal and said that Yumi had visited them that day as she missed the baby a lot. Here you can see one more important thing, that although Hannah was a modern woman, she did not eat with Sadao. It was because the Japanese tradition was against that. And towards the end of the conversation, you can see Sadao saying Hannah that the servants will return as soon as the American man left. Further in the story, you can see that night before going to bed, Sadao visited the man. He checked his body temperature, the wound, and the heartbeat. The heartbeat was unsteady due to the excitement as he was about to leave their home. The man's lips were pressed together and his eyes were red in color, which seemed to be burning with fire. The scars on his neck were still red, as they had not healed yet. The young man said to Sadao that he was saving his life once again. Sadao said that it was not like that, and he was sending him because he could not keep him any longer. Further, you can see Sadao was reluctant in giving him a torch, as he felt that if the man used it unwisely, he could be spotted and land into trouble. But finally he gave him his own torch, the one that he used when he had to attend to patients at night. Further, Sadao instructed the man, if his stock of food finished before he found a Korean fishing boat, he could signal him with 2 flashes of the torch at dusk time. He asked him to be careful not to signal when it was dark, because the light will be more visible in the dark as compared to dusk. He added further that the man could find fish in the sea near the island, but he had to eat it raw. He was not supposed to cook because the fire would be spotted by the guards and put him in danger. The man drew a breath on hearing the instructions and said okay. He wore a traditional Japanese dress that Sadao gave him to wear. Finally, Sadao wrapped a black cloth around his head to hide his golden-colored hair. The American man shook his hands with Sadao as he walked away towards the boat. He used the torch twice to find his way, but the guards would not doubt that. Sadao waited till he saw the torchlight once more as the man boarded the boat. Sadao closed the door of the partition and slept well that night, as he had finally got rid of the man. As you read the story further, you can see a week ago the general had been operated upon in an emergency in which Sadao took part. Sadao informed him that the man escaped. But that time the general was weak, as he was recovering from the operation. For 12 hours after the operation his condition was critical, and Sadao was not sure whether he would survive, because they had operated upon his gall bladder. But after the operation, gradually he started eating food and breathed deeply. Sadao did not have the courage to ask him what happened to the professional killers that he had promised to send to kill the American man. Sadao knew that the killers did not turn up ever. At Sadao's home, things returned to normal. The servants returned and they continued with their work. Here you can see how Yumi rushes to rid the house of any trace of the white man, which is perhaps a way to cover their tracks after illegally housing a prisoner of war, or yet another racist moment and a way to preserve Japanese purity. And that is why Yumi insists on burning sulfur in Sadao's father's room to purify it and get rid of the white man's smell. After a week Sadao felt that the general was well enough that he could discuss the man with him. He further tells the general that Tom has escaped. With a sinking feeling, the general realizes that he forgot to arrange for the private assassins to kill him. The general hastily declares that it was not dereliction of duty or lack of patriotism that led him to go back on his word. He simply forgot, as he was selfishly caught up in his own problems. Sadao insists that he understands entirely. Privately, he feels relieved, knowing that the general's own anxieties at appearing incompetent or unpatriotic mean that Sadao was safe, and that the general wouldn't dare tell anyone about Tom. Here Sadao declares, "I can swear to your loyalty, Excellency, and to your zeal against the enemy." That night Sadao gazes out at the island at dusk and is relieved to see that it was completely dark. There is no flash of light, which means Tom is no longer on the island. Sadao thinks Tom is undoubtedly safe now, since Sadao had carefully instructed him to wait specially for a Korean fishing boat. And finally Sadao stood in the veranda and recollected the past events. He looked at the sea from where the man had come that night. He had flashbacks of all the Americans he had met in his life. The dull professor at whose house he had met Hannah, his silly, talkative wife, who was very kind. He remembered his teacher of anatomy who had taught them to cut open the body with a knife. Then he remembered the fat, untidy landlady. Being a Japanese, he had found an accommodation in America with great difficulty. He hated living there, knowing that the Japanese were superior to the Americans and still being treated like inferiors. Sadao disliked the dirty old woman who finally agreed to let him live in her home, which was in a bad condition. Sadao tried to be thankful to her because she had taken care of him when he was struck by influenza during the last year of his stay in America. It was difficult for Sadao to be thankful to her, as he hated her even though she was kind to him. And finally Sadao thinks about Tom's white and repulsive face and wonders why he couldn't kill him. And he felt that it was so strange that he could not kill his enemy. Thus, the story comes to an end, conveying the message how respect for humanity can help transcend the narrow barriers and boundaries that divide nations on the basis of color, language, race, and geographical distinctions. I hope the session was helpful. Thank you.